Hi, I'm Marc, and this is my experience from the book The Buddha Next Door. Growing up, I was fortunate to have my grandparents living near us. We spent many fun hours playing penny poker with them and talking about business and politics and their travels around the world. My grandmother was a great cook as well as an artist and a sculptor, and my grandfather was the patriarch of the family. In fact, I never saw him ever get sick or even take an aspirin. Over 6 feet tall with a commanding voice, he was the kind of strong figure who held the family together through thick and thin. So you can imagine my shock when I received a phone call that Grandpa had had a heart attack while visiting my cousins in Seattle. The family was in turmoil and Grandpa was in a coma. I'd only been chanting for a few years, but in that brief time, I'd been able to introduce my grandmother to chanting. Although she was already in her 80s when she started, she took to chanting very naturally. When she called, I encouraged her to chant for Grandpa's complete recovery, total victory. But inside I was worried. As the days progressed, Grandpa's condition did not get better. And as I'd been told, the longer someone stays in the intensive care unit of a hospital, the less likely it is that they'll ever recover. I kept encouraging my grandmother and chanting lots and lots of Myoho Renge Kyo. I knew that I had to fly up to Seattle and bring the Buddha to the family crisis in person. I just started a new job, and my boss was willing to let me take a few days off. So I sold the Oriental rug off my living room floor, I bought a ticket, and I prepared to leave to join my mother, my uncles, my aunts, and cousins who had already converged on the hospital. But before I left, I realized that I needed to get some advice from one of my seniors in our Buddhist practice. The person I sought out had always encouraged me, even if he was often blunt. This time was no different. He told me that if I was planning to help the situation, I would have to take 100% responsibility for my grandfather's life, using this opportunity to try and repay my debt of gratitude to him. If I was unwilling to do this, I shouldn't even bother flying up there. I'd only make things worse. On the bumpy flight from Los Angeles to Seattle, I mulled over his words. I was determined to help, but how? When I arrived, I could see that things had taken a turn for the worse. My grandfather, the strong man in the family, was in a vegetative coma, thrashing around in a hospital bed that was too small for him, tethered in a thicket of wires, tubes, and straps. My relatives were also a mess, as none of them had ever thought they would see Grandpa in this condition. It shook and saddened them deeply. Some were even preparing for his death as if it was some kind of foregone conclusion. I, however, had determined to get to work. After a brief family meeting, I told my grandmother that my plan was to chant. Chant for wisdom, chant for to pierce Grandpa's life, and chant for the best possible care and total success. My grandmother joined me, but because of the stress and her age, she tired after a while. So I encouraged her to rest. I told her I would continue. I would take 100% responsibility. The rest of the family remained skeptical, and in fact, some were downright hostile. As I chanted to my comatose grandfather, I hardly noticed what was going on around me. But first, I was paid a visit by a nun. I thanked her for her concern, but told her that I had the situation in hand. And after a few more hours of chanting by the bedside, I was visited by a rabbi. I thanked him as well, but I told him that I was a Buddhist and I had my own way of working through this challenge. But still, I wasn't really sure what to do beyond chanting furiously. On the second day, after hours more of chanting, it began to sink into my life. I had to repay my debt of gratitude to my grandfather. All the years of love and support, gifts and ball games, dinners and travel. But more than that, he was a great model, a great role model of an honorable man. And he was my mother's father, without whom I would have not shown up on the planet. I owed him more than I realized, and I suddenly determined that I would pay it all back, even just a little, right here, right now. I looked at this sad figure before me, a drugged, disheveled man in his mid-80s, his eyes staring emptily in an ill-fitting gown and an ill-fitting bed, his breathing forced by this large respirator machine. This had to change. I tried to contact him through my chanting as if I was sending a beam of light into his life. Would he respond to me? I chanted as if to tell him if he could hear me or feel me that he should move his right arm. No response. He should move his left arm. No response. For a moment, I became disheartened. Then I remembered how our general director had once responded to a hospitalized, terminally ill member in our district. He bounded into that dark room. He grabbed her hand and he called the name of that member loudly. I'll never forget the face of this woman. I mean, she was dying. I thought she was almost gone. But at the sound of his voice, or should I say at the presence of his life condition, she responded. She opened her eyes and she smiled. I knew if I could bring out that kind of life condition, I would have a chance at really helping my grandfather in his darkest moment. Then it came to me. This guy was a fighter all of his life. Football champ, baseball star. He always gave 100%. If he had the chance, I called him my grandmother. We have to tell the doctors to take Grandpa off all the medicines, I said. We need to see if he's still there. She was skeptical, but I was on fire. She knew I was onto something, and her wisdom told her to trust this radical idea. The doctor, however, was more than skeptical. He thought we could be endangering the man's life. What life? I responded. He resisted. I told him and Grandma I would take 100% responsibility. Then she stood up to him, and she instructed the doctor to do as I said. As we chanted by his side, within minutes, as the medication wore off, his thrashing stopped. Then I called him in a loud voice, Grandpa, if you can hear me, nod your head. And he moved his head up and down weakly. Are you in pain? I shouted. And he moved side to side, nodding. Are you ready to fight? And he nodded up and down. I turned to the doctor. Take out the respirator right now. He was a bit stunned, but he did as I asked. Out came that big white plastic snake that forced air into my grandfather's paralyzed lungs. 30 minutes off the respirator was the minimum, with no strain on his heart. As my grandmother and I chanted through our tears, he labored to breathe. He went for 15 minutes, and then his heart rate went back up. Back in went the respirator. But down went all the medications. We needed Grandpa fully present for round 2. Now all of us, Grandma, the doctor, even the family, were ready to fight. The next day, he made it to 20 minutes. We were on the way. Then my boss called. I was needed back on the job, or there might not be a job. I had to leave. But I knew that I had set in motion a plan whose success I was certain of. On the following day, he slipped back to 15 minutes, but on the 4th day, that respirator came out for good. And within 2 days, he was moved to a recovery room, and within a week, he was on a plane back home to Chicago for a triple bypass operation. He recovered completely, though he lost a bit of his old fire. When I next saw him at a family holiday gathering, he pulled me aside, and he said, I don't know what you did back there, but whatever it was, I want to thank you. I just gave him a hug. I told him that was just my way of thanking him for all of his love and support over the years. And though my grandmother and I remained the only consistent chanters in the family, and she continued chanting right up until her death at 92, I can tell you that no one in the family ever gave me any guff about that Buddhism stuff ever again. Thank you.